The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of courtroom 4B as Judge Patricia Williams adjusted her black robes and took her seat behind the imposing wooden bench. At 9:30 a.m., another day of legal proceedings was about to begin. The courtroom buzzed with the usual mixture of lawyers shuffling papers, families whispering anxiously, and the steady hum of the air conditioning system working overtime in the August heat. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. Judge Williams had been presiding over this court for nearly 15 years, and she had seen it all. Drug cases, theft, assault charges, domestic disputes, the endless parade of human mistakes and poor choices that found their way into her courtroom. Today's docket looked routine enough. 3 minor drug possession cases, 2 DUIs, and 1 disorderly conduct charge. Nothing that would likely make headlines or challenge her decades of legal experience. The bailiff, Officer Marcus Thompson, called the court to order as the first case was announced. Judge Williams barely looked up from her paperwork as she heard the familiar words echoing through the room. But when the defendant for the disorderly conduct case stood up, something made her pause. There was something about the way the man carried himself, straight-backed, shoulders squared, with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place given the charges against him. Robert Bobby Mitchell was 72 years old, though he looked younger despite his silver hair and weathered face. He wore a simple navy blue suit that had seen better days, but it was clean and pressed. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his tie was knotted with military precision. As he approached the defendant's table, Judge Williams noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. There, pinned to the left lapel of his suit jacket, was a small blue ribbon with white stars. Judge Williams recognized it immediately. It was the ribbon that represented the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration awarded by the United States government. Her father had been a veteran, and she had grown up surrounded by stories of military service and sacrifice. She knew that fewer than 4,000 living people held this distinction. The charges against Bobby were straightforward but troubling. According to the police report, he had been arrested 3 nights earlier outside a local bar called Murphy's Tavern. The arresting officer, Patrolman Jake Sullivan, claimed that Bobby had been drunk and disorderly, shouting at other patrons and refusing to leave when asked by the establishment's management. When the police arrived, Bobby allegedly became combative and had to be physically restrained. But as Judge Williams looked at the man standing before her, something didn't add up. This wasn't the typical defendant she saw for disorderly conduct charges. There was no alcohol smell, no bloodshot eyes, no signs of the usual suspects who found themselves in trouble at bars. Instead, she saw a man who stood at attention, waiting respectfully for the proceedings to begin. Bobby's court-appointed attorney, Jennifer Walsh, was a young lawyer fresh out of law school. She had reviewed the case file quickly that morning and was prepared to enter a guilty plea and ask for community service. It was a routine case, or so she thought. She had briefly spoken with Bobby before the hearing, but he had been quiet and withdrawn, offering little information beyond confirming his name and address. As the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Michael Chen, began reading the charges, Judge Williams found herself studying Bobby more closely. There was something in his eyes, a distant look that she had seen before in other veterans who had appeared in her courtroom over the years. It was the look of someone who had seen things that most people couldn't imagine, who had carried burdens that left invisible scars. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Williams said, interrupting the prosecutor's routine recitation of charges, "before we proceed, I notice you're wearing a Medal of Honor ribbon. Is that accurate?" The courtroom fell silent. Bobby looked up, meeting the judge's eyes for the first time since entering the room. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. His voice was steady but carried the weight of years. "Can you tell me when and where you received this honor?" Judge Williams asked, her tone softer now. Bobby straightened slightly, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away from his face. "Vietnam, ma'am." 1968, near the village of Phu Bai. His voice was barely above a whisper, but every person in the courtroom heard him clearly. Jennifer Walsh looked up from her notes, suddenly realizing that this case was about to become much more complicated than she had anticipated. The prosecutor stopped reading and looked confused. uncertain whether this line of questioning was relevant to the disorderly conduct charges. "What happened there, Mr. Mitchell?" Judge Williams asked gently. Bobby was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back in a parade rest position that came as naturally to him as breathing. When he spoke, his words came slowly, carefully, as if he were walking through a minefield of memories. "My platoon was ambushed during a reconnaissance mission," he began. "We were pinned down by enemy fire and several of my men were wounded. The evacuation helicopter couldn't land because of the heavy gunfire from a concealed machine gun position." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I volunteered to take out the gun emplacement, crawled about 200 yards through enemy territory, eliminated the position and held it until the helicopter could extract the wounded." The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, caught up in the gravity of what she was hearing. "How many men did you save that day?" Judge Williams asked. "7, Bobby replied simply. "7 came home who wouldn't have otherwise." Judge Williams felt a lump forming in her throat. She looked down at the charges again. Disorderly conduct at Murphy's Tavern. Something was very wrong with this picture. She decided to dig deeper. "Mr. Mitchell, can you tell me what happened 3 nights ago at Murphy's Tavern, in your own words?" Bobby glanced at his attorney, who nodded encouragingly. He took another deep breath and began to speak. "I go to Murphy's every Wednesday night," he said. "It's nothing fancy. Just a quiet place where I can sit and have a beer and remember my buddies who didn't make it home. The bartender, Tom, he knows me. Always has a cold Budweiser waiting when I walk in at 8:15 p.m. He paused, gathering his thoughts. That night was different. There were some young men there, college kids maybe. They were loud, drunk, making jokes about soldiers, calling us baby killers, saying we were all crazy and dangerous. His voice remained steady, but Judge Williams could see his jaw tighten slightly. I tried to ignore them at first. I just wanted to drink my beer and think about my friends. But then one of them saw my hat. Bobby reached up and touched his head instinctively. I wear a Vietnam veteran cap when I go out. Has my unit patch on it. This kid started pointing at me, laughing, telling his friends that there was one of those crazy vets they had been talking about. Jennifer Walsh was taking notes frantically now, realizing that the story she was hearing was very different from what was in the police report. What happened next? Judge Williams prompted gently. The kid started getting louder, making jokes about how I probably had flashbacks and nightmares. His friends were laughing. But then he said something that I couldn't ignore. Bobby's voice grew quieter. He said that guys like me were the reason America lost the war, that we were cowards who came home and pretended to be heroes. The judge could see Bobby's hands trembling slightly now. She had dealt with enough veterans to recognize the signs of someone reliving a traumatic memory. That's when I stood up. Bobby continued. I walked over to their table, calm as could be. I didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten anyone. I just wanted to educate them a little bit about what really happened over there. I told them about my friends who died, about the sacrifices we made, about the things we saw and did to serve our country. How did they respond? Judge Williams asked. They got angry, started shouting at me, telling me to go away. One of them pushed me. I didn't push back. I never laid a hand on any of them. But I didn't back down either. I kept talking, trying to make them understand that the men and women who served in Vietnam deserved better than their disrespect. Bobby's account was painting a very different picture from the police report. Judge Williams made a note to speak with the arresting officer. When did the police arrive? She asked. Maybe 10 minutes later. Someone must have called them when the shouting started. Officer Sullivan came in with his partner. They took one look at the situation. Me, an old man, standing near a table of college kids who were yelling and pointing at me, and they assumed I was the problem. This was getting more interesting by the minute. Judge Williams had dealt with Officer Sullivan before, and knew him to be a decent cop. But like many officers, he sometimes made quick assumptions based on appearances. What happened when they tried to arrest you? I tried to explain what had really happened, but they weren't interested in hearing my side. When Officer Sullivan grabbed my arm to put the handcuffs on, I guess I instinctively pulled away, not aggressively, just a natural reaction, but he interpreted that as resisting arrest and called for backup to help restrain me. Judge Williams was beginning to see a pattern that troubled her deeply. A decorated war hero had been trying to defend the honor of his fallen comrades and had been arrested for his efforts. Officer Sullivan, she called to the back of the courtroom. Please come forward. The young patrolman looked surprised but made his way to the front of the courtroom. He was in his late 20s, clean-cut and professional-looking, but Judge Williams could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Officer Sullivan, can you describe what you observed when you arrived at Murphy's Tavern 3 nights ago?" Sullivan glanced nervously between the judge and Bobby. "Well, Your Honor, when we arrived, there was a disturbance in progress. The defendant was standing near a table of younger men who appeared agitated. The bartender said there had been shouting and that someone had called about a potential fight. Did you speak with any witnesses besides the bartender?" "We spoke briefly with the young men at the table. They said the defendant had approached them aggressively and was making threatening statements." Judge Williams noticed that Sullivan's account differed significantly from Bobby's version of events. "Did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Mitchell when you arrested him?" Sullivan thought for a moment. He seemed calmer than most people we arrest for disorderly conduct. Wasn't slurring his words or stumbling, but he did resist when I tried to handcuff him. "Officer Sullivan," Judge Williams said carefully, "did you notice the ribbon Mr. Mitchell is wearing on his lapel?" The officer looked at Bobby's jacket and shook his head. "No, ma'am. I can't say that I did." Judge Williams felt a wave of frustration. If Sullivan had taken just a moment to really look at Bobby, to ask a few questions, to try to understand the situation instead of making assumptions, this entire arrest might have been avoided. "Mr. Chen," she said, turning to the prosecutor, "I'm going to ask you to call the bartender as a witness. I want to hear his version of events before we proceed." The prosecutor looked flustered but nodded. Within 30 minutes, Tom Bradley, the bartender from Murphy's Tavern, was sworn in and ready to testify. Tom was a big man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of steady demeanor that came from years of dealing with drunk customers in difficult situations. "Mr. Bradley," Judge Williams began, "you know Mr. Mitchell?" "Yes, ma'am. Bobby's been coming to my place every Wednesday for about 3 years now. Always orders the same thing, a Budweiser and a shot of whiskey for his fallen buddies. Drinks the beer, leaves the shot untouched, never causes any trouble. Can you tell me what you observed on the night in question?" Tom's face darkened. Those college kids had been drinking for about 2 hours before Bobby showed up. They were getting louder and more obnoxious as the night went on. When Bobby came in and sat at his usual spot at the end of the bar, they started making comments about his veteran's hat. "What kind of comments?" "The usual ignorant stuff you hear from kids who don't know any better. Calling soldiers losers, saying the military was full of psychos and killers." Bobby ignored them at first, like he always does. But then they started getting personal, pointing at him and making jokes about old veterans living in the past. Judge Williams could see where this was heading. When did Mr. Mitchell approach their table? After one of them said something about how veterans who complained about being disrespected were just trying to get attention and free handouts. That's when Bobby got up, but he wasn't angry or threatening. He walked over there calm as anything and just started talking to them in a quiet voice. Could you hear what he was saying? Some of it. He was telling them about his time in Vietnam, about friends he lost. He was trying to educate them, not threaten them. His voice never got raised and he kept his hands to himself the whole time. This testimony was dramatically different from what the college students had apparently told Officer Sullivan. Judge Williams was beginning to see a clearer picture of what had really happened that night. How did the young men respond to Mr. Mitchell? Tom's expression grew angry. They got nasty, started shouting at him, calling him a baby killer and a murderer. One of them, a big kid with blonde hair, stood up and shoved Bobby pretty hard. Bobby just stood there and took it. Didn't retaliate, didn't even step back, just kept talking in that same calm voice. "Is that when you called the police?" "No, ma'am. I was about to throw those kids out myself." But one of them had already called 911 and told them there was a crazy old veteran threatening people. When the cops showed up, those kids immediately pointed at Bobby and said he was the problem. Judge Williams felt her anger rising. This was exactly the kind of situation that made her want to bang her gavel and demand justice. A war hero had been slandered, assaulted, and then arrested based on the false testimony of drunk college students who had been disrespecting him from the start. "Mr. Bradley, in your professional opinion as someone who has worked in a bar for many years, who was responsible for the disturbance that night?" Those college kids, without a doubt. Bobby was just defending himself in the memory of his friends. He handled himself like a gentleman the whole time, even when they were treating him like garbage. As Tom Bradley stepped down from the witness stand, Judge Williams looked around the courtroom. The atmosphere had changed completely from when the proceedings had begun. What had started as a routine disorderly conduct case had become something much more significant. She turned back to Bobby, who was still standing at attention by the defendant's table. "Mr. Mitchell, do you have anything else you'd like to say?" Bobby was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a voice that carried across the silent courtroom. "Your Honor, I didn't go to Murphy's that night looking for trouble. I just wanted to have a quiet drink and remember my friends. But when those young men started dishonoring the memory of the soldiers who died in Vietnam, I couldn't stay silent. Those men gave their lives for this country, and they deserve better than to have their sacrifice mocked by people who have never served." He paused, and Judge Williams could see tears forming in his eyes. "I don't regret standing up for them. I'd do it again tomorrow if I had to. Those 7 men I saved in Vietnam, they trusted me to have their backs. Even though they're gone now, I still have their backs." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Williams looked at the prosecution table, where Michael Chen was staring down at his papers with a troubled expression. She looked at Jennifer Walsh, who was wiping tears from her eyes. She looked at Officer Sullivan, who appeared to be rethinking everything he thought he knew about the case. Finally, Judge Williams spoke. "Mr. Chen, does the state wish to proceed with these charges?" The prosecutor stood slowly. He was a good man, Judge Williams knew, and she could see that he was struggling with the situation. "Your Honor, given the testimony we've heard today, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Mitchell." Judge Williams nodded. "Motion granted, Mr. Mitchell, you are free to go." But she wasn't finished yet. "However, before you leave, I want to say something to everyone in this courtroom." She stood up, something she rarely did during proceedings. "Mr. Mitchell, you served this country with extraordinary honor and courage. You saved the lives of 7 American soldiers and were awarded our nation's highest military decoration. The fact that you were arrested for defending the memory of your fallen comrades is not just wrong. It's a disgrace." She turned to Officer Sullivan. "Officer, I want you to think carefully about what happened here today. Quick assumptions and failure to gather all the facts led to the arrest of an American hero. I trust this won't happen again." Sullivan nodded, his face red with embarrassment and shame. Judge Williams then addressed the entire courtroom. "We live in a free country because of men and women like Mr. Mitchell. The least we can do is treat them with the respect and dignity they have earned through their service and sacrifice." As the judge prepared to adjourn the court, something unexpected happened. Officer Sullivan walked over to Bobby and extended his hand. "Mr. Mitchell, I owe you an apology. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Bobby shook the young officer's hand. "No hard feelings, son. You were just doing your job as you saw it. But maybe next time, take a moment to listen before you make assumptions." Jennifer Walsh approached Bobby as well. "Mr. Mitchell, I want to thank you for your service. Is there anything I can do for you? Any legal matters you need help with?" Bobby smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. "Actually, there is something. I've been trying to get the VA to approve a memorial for my unit at the local cemetery. The paperwork is complicated and I could use some help navigating the bureaucracy." "Consider it done," Jennifer replied without hesitation. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Judge Williams called Bobby over to the bench. "Mr. Mitchell, I hope you'll continue going to Murphy's on Wednesday nights. You have every right to be there, and you have every right to defend the honor of your friends." "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that." "One more thing," Judge Williams said quietly. "My father served in Korea. He would have been proud to shake your hand." Bobby straightened up and rendered a perfect military salute to the judge, who returned it with a small nod of her head. As Bobby walked out of the courtroom, still wearing his pressed suit and polished shoes, still carrying himself with the dignity of a soldier who had served his country with honor, the morning sun seemed to shine a little brighter through those tall windows. Justice hadn't just been served that day. It had been rescued from a terrible mistake. That evening, Bobby returned to Murphy's Tavern at exactly 8:15 p.m. Tom Bradley had his usual Budweiser waiting, along with a shot of whiskey for his fallen friends. But this time Bobby wasn't alone. Officer Sullivan was there, buying drinks for anyone who wanted to hear stories about Vietnam. Jennifer Walsh was there too, working on paperwork for the memorial, and in the back corner Judge Williams sat quietly with a glass of wine, listening to Bobby tell stories about 7 brave men who had trusted him to have their backs. It was by all accounts a much better Wednesday night than the one that had started this whole mess, And somewhere in whatever place fallen soldiers go to watch over their brothers in arms, 7 men were probably smiling, knowing that their friend Bobby was still fighting the good fight, still standing up for what was right, still carrying their memory with the same courage he had shown on that long-ago day near the village of Pubai. The Medal of Honor ribbon on Bobby's lapel caught the light from the tavern's neon sign, and for just a moment it seemed to shine a little brighter, as if reflecting not just the light, but the honor, courage, and sacrifice it represented. In a world that often seemed to have forgotten the value of such things, it was good to know that some people still remembered, still cared, and still stood up for what mattered most. And in courtroom 4B, justice had been served not just by the letter of the law, but by the spirit of understanding, compassion, and respect that should guide all our interactions with those who have sacrificed so much for the freedoms we enjoy. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important cases aren't the big ones that make headlines, but the small ones that restore our faith in the system and in each other. Bobby Mitchell would continue to visit Murphy's Tavern every Wednesday night for years to come, and every time he raised that Budweiser to his lips, he would remember not just his 7 fallen friends, but also the day that a judge recognized the true meaning of justice. A young lawyer learned about honor. A police officer discovered the importance of listening, and a bartender proved that sometimes the most important witnesses are the ones who see with their hearts as well as their eyes. The story of what happened in that courtroom would be told and retold, becoming a legend of sorts in the local legal community. But for Bobby, it was just another day of serving his country and his fellow veterans, of standing up for what was right, and of proving that true heroes never really retire. They just find new ways to serve.